They said the truth won't survive beside the lies that maintain the decaying faces.
You know, I've known about this for a while, and you know, I gotta share it before I forget. But this is how powerful system guidance is, man. You gotta understand how powerful system guidance is. Now, you know, we all know the strong and independent woman speech. I don't need no man. Now, you know, that's the surface level. If you hear that, you're like, okay, she's saying she's strong and independent and doesn't need a man, right? That's what you would hear from the surface. Now, the subsurface level is that she is ensuring that she dedicates her life to making it as hard as possible to display her loyalty to the system guidance and, you know, working for approval. You know what I'm saying? It's when a woman makes that announcement, it's really an announcement of how loyal she is to ensuring that she will struggle and place herself on at the mercy of the system guidance, the corporations, the industry field, the government. It's all about stripping herself of a higher chance of overcoming that. You know what I'm saying? Even you know, to flip it, put it on the man side, they've trained us to basically run away and avoid minimalism. You know what I'm saying? To pursue identifying based on as much as we can have, to basically place our own lives at the standpoint of, I will not chase making my life easier. I will ensure that I prove my loyalty to the system guidance by being the best and consumer first. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of this stuff, man, happening that a lot of people don't understand what's going on, you know. So they've trained a lot of people to identify with you know, self strangulation, really. You know, it's a self identifying as placing and ensuring that your life is as much of a struggle as possible. And with the women, well, you know, I said it's male mind games. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is how strong the male mind game is that, you know, you have so many men actually believing and speaking from a standpoint that feminism actually was created by women. That's how strong our fellow man's mind games are. But the narrative of strong and independent minded woman is basically on a subsurface level the dedication to ensuring that her life is at such a stranglehold on ensuring she struggles as best as she can to give every aspect of her life to the system guidance. Then for the men, it's basically putting yourself in the pursuit of peacocking. You know what I'm saying? Basically basing your whole identity on your participation in consumerism and actually abandoning what is it, minimalism. You know, because we're at the standpoint where, if you think about it, about minimalism, we're at the point where you can basically have everything you want. You know what I'm saying? And still maintain minimalism. Now, I know what you're thinking, you know, because you're listening from the surface level. You know what I'm saying? And also you're not adding up the logistics. What would I mean by that? You know what I'm saying? You know, you can rent a luxury car, you know, for a day or two. You know, you can rent that. If you want to know the feeling of owning and having a luxury car, you can rent it. You want to know the feeling of owning and having a mansion, you know, you can Airbnb it. You know what I'm saying? Everything is basically there for you to have the experience. You know what I'm saying? So you can basically have the experience of, yeah, man, you know what I'm saying? I once had a mansion, Airbnb. You know what I'm saying? I once had a Lamborghini. luxury rental. You know what I'm saying? If you got to get it out of your system, you want to experience it, you can. You know what I'm saying? We're at the point where you don't need to own, the owner trap. You know what I'm saying? It's like I said, a lot of guys are at the point where, man, once you realize you're not going to start a family, you're not going to do all that. Why would any of your experiences when it comes to how you utilize your money and spend your hard earned dollars be pushed towards getting the experience, such as, unless it's business. Like I said, if it's business, what I mean, you got business you're doing, you need more room, okay, privacy and all that. Yeah, you're gonna get your own apartment, you're gonna get your own housing, and that's another one. You might rent again. You know what I'm saying? You might do a long lease for a rental. You know, you might rent a house for a certain amount for business. But when it comes to being, prioritizing your existence, your mobility, your freedom, what's happening is a lot of men are at the situation where, what I'm saying, you don't own anything anymore. You don't put anything, when I mean owning, you don't pursue owning your, what I'm saying, owning your damn, what's the word I'm forgetting, ranking. You don't pursue being at the top of the consumeristic rankings anymore. A lot of men are basically looking at it as, dude, the only thing I need to own is myself. You know what I'm saying? With myself, I'm absolutely more mobile than ever before. And then after Conan 19 shut down the whole country, then what was it? All eggs went bad. You know what I'm saying? We've seen they're willing to shut down the whole country anytime. So your flexibility and mobility is number one priority. That's why guys are, I spoke to a Gen Xer, showed me, yeah, man, he's got some silver, he's got some coin saved up. Guys are diversifying their earnings, not keeping everything domestic. What I mean? Guys are flipping the script. And it's like I said, since, Casper 1.0, to where we are now, full time ghosting, once you look at it and say, hey, man, I'm not getting married. So if I'm not getting married, you know, why would I be getting a massive apartment that can house a family for when, what I mean? I don't need that much room unless it's business. Yeah, if it's business, all right, you do that. That's why you see a lot of these videos. That's why I tell guys, man, I'm so far ahead. I ain't, even when I see other people talking, what I mean? It's like watching something in the past and they're wrong. You see a lot of videos of guys saying, yeah, I have my own place. I got peace, which is great. I said it is a great thing. I once had that when I was in Texas, for a minute. But the thing is, those guys say they're at peace, but if you're still spending and living like a man that's preparing for a family, you know what I'm saying? Your housing situation is all built on a family scenario, starting a family, you know what I'm saying? Or even with the current climate of hosting, what do they have? What they call that, bro? Bachelor parties and all that stuff, That's why Airbnb changed the game, man. Airbnb completely changed the game, because you don't have to host anything personal anymore. When personal puts you at risk. A lot of guys are Airbnb and stuff, but the narrative changes to, man, I'm not planning on having a family, you know. So why would I be, unless it's money related? Like I said, if you're trying to make money, you might get a real estate, you know what I'm saying? You might get some real estate, or you might have a bigger apartment for business reasons, yeah. But for the standpoint of you as a man, you look at yourself and you're all about mobility, the next opportunity, the biggest opportunity, where you're gonna have to travel anyway. We saw that big scam of what they call it, what is it, work at home. They've canceled that a lot. But it's like I said years ago, you're only loyal to opportunity. And as we've seen with how the cities, the towns, taxation, all of them got, many states, no fault. Same, every state you go to, the men are targeted here and there. There's no loyalty to your safety or your provision anyway. So your goal is to be flexible and being able to be mobile. That's why I used to ask guys a question. Your phone is mobile, your laptop is mobile, your car is mobile, your home has to be mobile. You know what I'm saying? Or at least you can at least leave it at a drop of an opportunity. If an opportunity presents itself, bang, you're gone. You know what I'm saying? You're gone, bro. That's how you gotta look at it. Your goal is to be available when opportunity calls itself. You know what I'm saying? That's why I would tell guys zero liabilities. You know what I'm saying? Zero liabilities, zero attachments. You know what I'm saying? Beyond yourself, you can't expand any of those. Outside of yourself, you can't have any other liabilities. You are your only liability. You are your only attachment. You know what I'm saying? And that's all you got. So what happens is, man, you separate. Once you accept that, you know, you're not gonna end up in a situation where you're not mobile. You know, where an opportunity, you get calls from another state, you could be there that next night. You could take a flight for that new career, that new business opportunity, because you don't have anything stationary. You have not, besides, I'd say maybe land. You know what I'm saying? If you're buying land, okay, you're a landowner. All right, that's stationary. You'll have that. You're a landowner by all means. But what's happening is a lot of guys, I said, are realizing, hey, man, and this is something they're not covering. Like I said, man, and this is I forget the word, the burden. There it is. This is the burden of being ahead. The burden of being ahead is, man, they'll never cover. By the time they cover what the hell I'm talking about, it'll be 5 to 10 years. You know what I'm saying? 5 to 10 years. I watched it when I was in the manosphere, since 2015 or 16, or when I've been a part of certain channels. You know what I mean? I was on interviews or I called in shows and this and whatnot, and I was telling people what's coming down the road. You know, this is the burden of being ahead of your time. Being ahead of your time is knowing how far behind of you they are. And one thing they're not explaining is that, okay, they're saying, oh, all these men, they're not dating, they're not dating, they're not having relationships, they're not getting married. They don't add up that if all these men aren't doing none of this, these men are no longer looking for relationships in a location they know and have understanding of. Men are just pursuing opportunities and chasing opportunities exclusively. That means the men are never available. You know, the men are constantly hopping uh, from state to state, country to country. If you're chasing opportunity, so these women don't get that. These men are not just not available from a standpoint of they're not even pursuing dates, but they're not available from a standpoint of they're not even staying in their state anymore. You know what I'm saying? Men are just jumping planes, traveling, chasing opportunities. You know what I'm saying? That's why I look at the passport bro thing. I'm like, yeah, guys are flying to have intercourse or, date overseas. Then they come back and live the life of a man that would have the experience of a man that's potentially trying to start a family. The whole stationary setup of their living. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I told guys, man, if you have, I tell you this as a word of advice. If you have a lot of stuff, you better go get a storage facility. You know what I'm saying? I think a major step you should try in your life is go to a storage facility. You know what I'm saying? Because you can leave stuff in storage. And, having stuff in storage will psychologically affect your mind to where you're only buying and getting things from a standpoint of you don't want to go to the storage facility. When you have everything in one location at your home or your housing quarters, it's easy for you to start, you know, just getting stuff and packing it in the house, nesting habits. You know what I'm saying? We naturally have that. We'll just start storing a lot of stuff, putting a lot of stuff, you know, where we're at. You know what I'm saying? That's why I tell guys, man, if you're not getting a mobile home, get yourself a storage facility. And one of the homies on here got that. Many homies got here. Get yourself a storage facility because that latency between, man, if I don't got enough room for this, I got to put it in storage. This psychologically messes with your mind to where you're not just hoarding. You know what I'm saying? You're not just hoarding things, physically. You're not just hoarding things in that one house, that stationary setting. You're not just hoarding things there. And then when it's time to move, a job or an opportunity calls where you're like, you know what? Oh, I gotta figure out how to get things moved out, how to get things out of the house, out of the location. You don't gotta worry about that. If you got a storage facility. You know what I'm saying? Because with storage, the latency of, what I'm saying, the multiple steps of you go buy something now, before you even go buy something, you gotta think about, are you gonna put in storage? Then when you're buying something, you start thinking about, am I gonna, I don't got room in the house. Am I putting it in storage? You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of it. A storage facility allows you more room to think, more clarity, to potentially avoid a crippling consumption. Also, you gotta, this might be another talking point, is avoid digital hoarding as well, where you're just hoarding digital games. I know I got a Steam library. I had to talk to my boy, but I'm like, man, yeah, slow down on Steam, man. We can't just keep buying and hoarding games, hoarding software. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people aren't talking about digital hoarding, where you're just like, man, you're buying all these games for your PlayStation Network and you never played any of them. You're buying all these games for Steam and you never played them. Like, dude, I got 2 Steam accounts. One of them has over 100 games, and I've never touched it. And I haven't touched those games on that account in over 2 years, over 3 years. Then I got another account with thousands of games. You know what I'm saying? So you gotta be careful of the digital hoarding as well. But that's a whole other convo, because hoarding digitally, you know what I'm saying, you just keep burning your money. But because there's no physical burden of storage, it's a lot easier for you to just keep hoarding digital. You know what I'm saying? But like I was saying, man, you get yourself a storage facility, you know, to prioritize your mobility. So nothing is stationary with you where you're like, you know what, man, I bought this, I bought that. No, with a storage facility, your mind will always be on, I don't know, man. I don't want to take this to storage. Ah, man, I'll have to take it to storage. Oh, man, I'm running out of storage. You know what I'm saying? It creates a burden for you to think about, where you'll seek to avoid it. You know what I'm saying? So you end up in a situation where you're not gonna be buying and buying as much, because that latency, that thought of that extra step, I got to take it to storage. You know what I'm saying? But like I said, man, a lot of men are, like I said, full time ghosting and stuff. Is that there's a lot of men, like I said, what is it? I think you got, and I predicted this a while ago. What is it? They got financial celibacy. I said that years ago. You know what I'm saying? I didn't call it financial celibacy. But a lot of men, you know, the average man is, you'll see videos of guys with the burden, uh, you know, if they're not spending money, if they're not doing it for business, you'll see guys with homes and big houses and this and that. where the expense is that of a family. But also, what's gonna happen? I saw this years ago. When I was up in I'll be up in Hoboken, New Jersey. There's a lot of men that down there they're roommates because of how expensive it is there. But also a major movement that's gonna happen is a lot of men are gonna be roommates, man. Roommates. But like I said, with you might even avoid that as well because if the rule you're operating on is, man, we can't have any women here. You got to take her to a motel or you got to go to a separate Airbnb or hotel because I don't want to risk her falsely accusing any of us. You know, we don't want that. So that's let me take that back. That's another thing that might change. A lot of men won't even roommate anyway because the risk of a man potentially bringing a woman in there to smash and hit, and then she falsely accuses the guys. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men, even in that scenario, men won't be roommating anymore anyway. So there's a lot happening, man. There's a lot happening, and I think with the scenario going on, that men won't be having housing, and men will avoid stationary trapping. Mobility is freedom. Like I made that video. Damn, video's got to be nearly 6 years old or more. Mobility is freedom. Existence over purpose. What I'm saying. And I think that's what's happening. A lot of men are gonna have to make a choice. And like I said, a lot of guys are behind. They'll have financial celibacy, and you're like, so it takes money. It takes you not spending your money to be celibate. You know, you know what I'm saying? Taking your money away. So a lot of men are basically no. I think it was financial celibacy, and they're not gonna spend their money, you know, on the women or something. Which I mean, at the end of the day, this also breaks down. What is you both go to a coffee spot, get a coffee. A woman, if you're financially celibate, that means you might have an idea, get her a muffin or something. You won't even do that. You know what I'm saying? But, what's going to happen is, man, like I said, man, you know, to take it back is that as soon as more men realize that, man, you know, you're not starting a family. You're not starting a family. You can't spend like you're starting a family. You can't live like you're starting a family. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men will step away from that. And what you're going to see, if they choose to, is you're going to see men are so mobile. You know what I'm saying? You know how they're saying, well, over 40% of the women will be single by 2030, which we're already there. My theory, it will be over 50%. You know what I'm saying? It'll be over 50%. But what you're going to see happening is that since so many men are taking flights and traveling, you know what I'm saying? You know how men used to just stay in one place. They wanted to start a family in that town, that city. Since that's gone, what's going to happen is, man, a lot of the women in that town will be, experiencing a drought, especially if jobs and opportunities are gone. A lot of those men will just basically fly out and leave. And what you're going to see in the news stations aren't covering is that a lot of men are no longer staying in one location, state-wise, city-wise. You know what I'm saying? They're not staying in one location. So what's going to happen is the news ain't covering that. Where have the men gone? They don't add that since men are no longer stationary, they're not dating for relationships, starting a family. You know what I'm saying? That's a big reason why a lot of men stay in locations. They plan to start a family there. They plan to build from their hometown and so on. What they don't get is, man, as soon as men see no point in building or starting a family, the men are in pursuit of mobility and opportunities. And those opportunities could take a man in and out of state, out of country. Men aren't going to be stationary, which means the women will just constantly see a man one day and he's gone. He's out of the state. And then the other thing, like I said, with zero liabilities, zero attachments, is that, you know what I'm saying? I've been saying this since Casper Pill 1.0, which I don't know if they deleted that, that you can't really have a date or a relationship, because if there's no liability, you can never move in with her. You can't move in with her. You can't live in the same place. You know what I'm saying? So if there's the pursuit of zero liability, that basically cuts off any relationships, any dating you could have. And what women can live like that? What woman could live with a man, could be with a man, not live with him? I mean, what woman could be with a man where they can never live together? You know what I'm saying? They could never live together. Every time they're together, it's a rented place, cameras, enters out. They can never be together because that man is an absolute removal of liability. You know, another thing is, the more that man falls into zero liability, you know, and like I said, once you remove idealism, zero idealism, you won't have the goal of the ideal family, the ideal traditional this and that. You won't have none of that. You know what I'm saying? That's not part of the plan, you know? So a lot of men will basically, like I said, full-time ghosting, in that pursuit, zero liability, zero attachments. You know what I'm saying? Zero idealism. You know what I mean? Once you have that, man, you're gonna never be available for the domestic setting. You know what I'm saying? You won't be available for sustainable, stationary relationships, because everything you prioritize is about mobility. Since you're not starting a family, you're not dating. You know what I mean? So if none of this applies, a man becomes absolutely nomadic. You know what I'm saying? Nomadicism takes over. Think about it. I've been saying this for years. You're gonna be nomadic. You know what I mean? If you're not gonna have any stationary relationships, any stationary interaction, or anything of that nature, you're basically gonna become nomadic. You know what I'm saying? You're just gonna be constantly, always on the move, man. Nomadic. You know what I'm saying? Nomadicism becomes the only thing you're prioritizing. Is, man, I gotta be nomadic. I gotta be able to move. I gotta be able to chase the opportunity. Because the honest truth is, when the deer, for example, nomadicism, dude, when the deer left, this is when men, before the farming and all that stuff, when the prey left, the men would move, right? The men would chase after the prey. So when the prey left, the deers, the animals we ate, we just go after them, before farming. And even with farming, if out of nowhere, you know what I'm saying, maybe, if out of nowhere there's a storm, an earthquake, something that destroys crops and domestication, men will just move to the next, nomadicism. You know what I'm saying? And what's happening with the dating rules and all that, it's triggering men to be nomadic. And it ain't nomadic from a standpoint of, oh, I'm just gonna pursue dating outside of my state. Nah, man. I said, man, men are flying outside of the country. You know what I'm saying? Men are going anywhere. Nomadicism is all men have. It's the oldest habit within a man. They'll just go where an opportunity, a better opportunity. You ain't gonna be stationary. Men are far more stationary than the men. Because, they got to be around a community they know, and, they're not men. You know what I'm saying? So what's happening as men take on this prospect is that you're going to see, and the news won't cover it, is that the men aren't available. The men have completely changed their habit. They're no longer stationary. They're constantly on the move. And the news stations ain't going to cover that, you know? Because if the news stations cover that, it's going to admit that every man, anytime a woman sees a man in her town, she better try to get that man ASAP, because he could be gone. They're nomadic, you know?
They said the truth won't survive beside the lies that maintain the decaying faces.